Everybody, I'm Mary Jane Bruce. Do you remember me? Your international village teacher. I love learning, I love reading, and I like to share with you what I've been learning and reading about. Today, I want to read to you from this book I got, Edison. Do you know anything about Edison? I have my marker up here because I've been reading ahead. So I want to share with you who Edison is. Thomas Alva Edison was an inventor. Would you like to be an inventor? He ended up getting 1,093 patents, and I'll tell you later what a patent is, okay? So we're going to start reading about Edison and the fun things that he did. He was an exciting person. Thomas Alva Edison was born during the early hours of February 11th, 1847 in Ohio. 1847, that's a long time ago. That's way before I was born. That's way before your teacher was born. That's way before my mommy was born. I'll show you where in Ohio is on my map. So remember, I'm from Florida and Ohio is way up there. I was born in Indiana, so now you know 3 states. The United States of America is made up of 50 states. So he was born to Nancy Elliott. She was a school teacher, and his dad was Samuel Edison Jr. So he lived in Ohio the first 7 years of his life. He played around the family home. He fell into a canal and almost drowned. He did a little bit too much playing sometimes that got him into trouble. One day he fell into a wheat bin and almost smothered. He held a skate strap for a friend who wanted to shorten it with an axe and lost the end of his finger. He got in trouble for doing things he shouldn't be doing. He just kept checking things out. He was so curious. Well, we got to be careful. Sometimes we can be too curious and get ourselves in trouble. One day he was missing and they went to look for him. He was sitting on goose eggs trying to hatch them. He was consumed with wonder. He was curious. He wanted to know why. He had lots of questions. Do you like to ask questions? That's the only way you find out things is by reading and asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions if you don't understand something. So he wanted to fly. He thought it'd be fun to fly. So he tried all kinds of experiments. Well, his dad, he thought he was a little dull, but his mom understood him and tried to help him answer those questions. So in 1854, before his 8th birthday, his family moved to Port Huron, Michigan. There he went to school. Okay, so here you find out he was born in Ohio, and then he went up to Michigan. So now you know another state. He went to school for 3 months. He didn't have very much formal education. His teacher thought he was addled, which is another name for retarded. Well, he wasn't, though. So he had them make fun of him. Have you ever had anybody make fun of you? Well, it's not nice to make fun of someone, and we sure don't like to be made fun of. So his mom decided to take him out of school and teach him at home because she was a teacher. So she taught him all kinds of things, and he learned very quickly. He learned to read, and he loved reading books. He read all kinds of books. One day, he decided he wanted to read the Dictionary of Sciences. Can you imagine? Do you know what a dictionary is? A dictionary is a book that we go to read and find out about how to spell things. We look up definitions to know what a word means. Well, he read the whole dictionary. Most people don't read the dictionary. He had so much desire to go to school and to learn. And it said that in spite of his lack of formal education by going to the classroom, a school like you and I went to, then he recognized the great need of education and how much it meant. So in later years, he sponsored the famous Edison Scholarship for outstanding high school graduates who were selected each year through a national contest. You want to do well in school. You want to try to get a scholarship one day so you can continue your education. Well, Edison had some handicaps, but he didn't let that keep him from doing the things that he wanted to do. He wanted to learn. And and he wanted to get as much knowledge as he could. He was a very young entrepreneur. So his mom and dad let him take a job, and he worked as a newsboy and a candy butcher on the train of the Grand Trunk Railroad running from Port Huron to Detroit. In this, his first job, he exhibited a knack for business and an ambition far exceeded that of the average boy. He maintained a chemistry lab. Can you imagine that? In the train's baggage car, which also served to house a small printing press on which Edison ran off copies of the Weekly Herald, the first newspaper ever edited, published, and printed aboard a moving train. In addition, he became a middleman for fresh vegetables and fruit, buying from the farmers along the route and selling to Detroit markets. In his early teens, he also raised vegetables and earned $600 a year. That was a lot of money back then. That's a lot of money for a young person to raise now. When he was 13 years old, he was earning several dollars, a tidy sum, even for a man in those days. So during the Detroit layovers, when he was working on the train, he went to the public library and he read and read and read. It is said that he literally read the library, every book it contained. Already he was putting into practice a theory followed throughout his life that hard work and sound thinking, there's nothing that can substitute that. As a boy, Edison, like many other Americans at that time, had a great excitement for news and watched the pioneering bands of young telegraphers who extended their long wires across the great prairies through Indian occupied territories and over the mountains to California. So they had these wires that they had on poles up in the sky, and they went, so he was over here in Michigan, and they would go all the way over to California. California is another state along the coast of the United States. And so they would tap out messages, secret messages, sometimes during the war. And it was an interesting job. So he learned how to do that. A man taught him how to do that. So then for 5 years, he roamed the central states of the U.S. He went back and forth around in here and did different jobs as a telegraph operator. And he also learned Spanish. That's a different language, just like you speak Yoruba or English or Hausa or Italian. Somebody may speak Italian. My sister-in-law is from Hungary, so she speaks Hungarian. There's all kinds of languages. So he even wanted to learn a language. That's very interesting, isn't it? But one time in 1868, when he was 21, he went to Boston to work at a Western Union office. Okay, so over here is Boston, Massachusetts. So he's traveled quite a bit, around here in the United States. Would you like to travel sometime? You can travel too someday if you get an education and you are able to make money to travel. Well, somebody was trying to play a trick on him. They wanted to see how smart he was. So he sat down to get their message on the telegraph, and they tried to do it real fast. And then they went slow and they tried to trick him, but he was smart and he figured out the messages. Well, there's one thing that's really interesting that I liked reading about in this book about Thomas Edison, his first big invention. In Boston, Edison started reading the works of Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday was an English scientist. They excited him strangely, and very quickly he was taking out his first patent, one out of 1,093. Remember, I told you here that Thomas Edison was an inventor and he had patents? Well, now I'm going to tell you what a patent is. I wrote it down on this card to explain to you what a patent is. Okay, a patent is a legal document giving the owner, which was Thomas Edison, property rights over a specific invention, okay, to keep others from making or using or selling the invention without your permission. So if you invent something, you would want to get a patent so nobody else could take your idea. It was usually a limited time. So maybe you would tell them you wanted a patent and they would give it to you for a year, okay? And at the end of the year, it would expire. You could renew the patent. So you can look online on the computer to find some examples of that. But I thought that was interesting. He got a lot of patents. That means he invented a lot of things. And not everything that he invented did he get a patent for, but he invented a lot of things. So he obtained hundreds of foreign patents too. A short time later, he invented a stock ticker, which was the major breakthrough in young Edison's career, and it took him to New York. Edison liked to travel. Okay, so now we're going to show you, he was in Michigan and he went over here to New York. There, he was called upon to repair a complicated system by which brokers were then receiving stock quotations, and he came to the attention of General Lefter, president of the Gold and Stock Telegraph Company. He encouraged him to improve his stock ticker. Edison did so. When the improvements had been completed, the general asked Edison what he thought he should receive for his work. Here is Edison's own account of the interview. I had made up my mind that I would be entitled to $5,000, but could get along with $3,000. When the psychological movement arrived, I hadn't the nerve to name such a large sum. So I said, well, General, and meaning that he kind of got like he was afraid to ask for too much. Suppose you make me an offer. Then he said, how would $40,000 strike you? Wow, that's a lot of money. But he worked really hard to make this invention. This caused me to come as near as fainting as ever he could. He was so surprised at that much money. He managed to say, I think that'll be fair. 3 days later, Edison received a check for $40,000. That's a lot of money now. Some people don't make that much money for a long time. That was a lot of money back in the 1800s. He went to the bank and gave it to the teller, who passed it back, saying something Edison did not understand because he was rather deaf. Okay, so he was very smart. And so even if you're deaf, you can do all kinds of things if you have a mind to. He was thinking that he had been cheated, so he rushed back to the general's office, and then they laughed at him because all he had to do was endorse the check. Endorsing was he had to turn the check over and he had to write his signature, his name, Thomas Edison, and take it back to the bank. And that's what he did. He went back to the bank. So he didn't always understand everything, even though he was very smart. So if you don't understand something, ask a question, okay? That's how you learn. So he went back to the bank and the man counted out the money to him, $40,000 cash. So he took the money back in those bills and he stowed them in his pockets and went to his lodgings in Newark, where he sat up all night with the money, fearing it might be stolen. The next morning, he came back to the general, and the general arranged for Edison to deposit the currency, and he opened his first bank account. Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing about Edison. I think he's a very interesting man. He invented a lot of things, and we'll learn about those inventions as we read more of his book. Right now, I have to ask you some questions. So, can you tell me, where in the United States of America was Thomas Edison born? Do you remember? Ohio. Yes, you're right. Ohio. That was where he was born. And he lived in Ohio for quite some time. And then he moved to another state. Do you remember the other state he moved to? Michigan. Yes. Later, he traveled to Massachusetts and New York. He took a job when he was 12 years old. What was he doing? Do you remember? He worked on a train, right? And he helped to print the first ever newspaper on a train. He also raised vegetables, right? Can you remember how many patents he had during his lifetime? 1,093 patents. Okay, I'll talk to you next time and we'll read some more book. Bye for now.